Well, welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Well, we finally got a break in the weather, so we're going to go out and do some saw work today. But if you're looking for our video from last week, we didn't have one because the weather was too bad and some other technical difficulties. So once in a while, not very often, stuff happens and we might miss a video here and there, but like I say, rarely. So anyway, what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be talking about old tech versus newer tech. So we're going to start out with old tech here. This is my old McCulloch / Montgomery Ward's saw. Basically a Mac 610. It's a 60cc. I'm running a 24-inch bar on it. This is the basic standard bottom line Mac 610. And the only difference between this, had a few cheap features on it, but where they could save a buck or two here and there, but the power head is identical. And this one still has the chain brake on it, and pretty much complete. And I got this at an estate sale. I knew the people that had it at one time, and since it said Montgomery Ward's on it, nobody'd buy it. And just as we're leaving, the guy said, "Hey, you looked at that all day. Why don't you buy it? It's only $5." And probably 35 years ago, still on the job. Anyway, this, like I say, is, for McCulloch anyway, was the start of a new style saws, because prior to these pretty much everything was an all metal saw. And these came out in 1976. It was called the Farm Mac originally, and since this one is a Montgomery Ward's, they changed the color on it. And one of the commentators said, "Hey, that looks kind of cheesy, so here it is, the cheesy Mac." And so anyway, what we're going to do is we've got a stump out there. I'm going to cut cookies on it, and so we're going to time them. And unfortunately, it's not a real big stump, so this might just be for the heck of it. But anyway, we'll do like 3 cuts with each saw, and then we'll time them and see old versus newer. So I'm going to start out with a 610 basically. And then we're going to go with a 650. And the basic difference on this, identical displacement. Everything's the same on it except for the cylinder. It has an extra port, a finger port, and it has a bigger exhaust port. And McCulloch said it made 30% more horsepower than the standard 610. I don't think it was quite that much, but there's enough difference you can actually tell. The exhaust note's a lot different, it's a lot sharper. The other saw has kind of a mellow tone to it. And then we're going to talk about Mr. Cheesy. Well, I've changed my hat to a Stihl hat from my McCulloch hat, so now I'm qualified to talk about Stihl BS. So this saw we did some recent videos on, and it's a fairly recent acquisition. And even though it's a bit older saw, it's basically the same layout and stuff that they use today. The only difference being the electronic carburetor and fuel controls and ignition stuff is a little different, but basically the layout of the saw is the same. So this thing is a 57 and plus cc saw, and I've talked there again. If you want to know all the good BS on it, go back and watch our other videos. I explain the features of it, good and bad, and take it out and run it a little bit. So anyway, like I say, we'll take the 3 saws out and do some cookies and time them and see if new is really that much better than old. Let's see at the stump. Well, here's the stump we're going to be cutting. So like I say, I'll do 3 cuts with each saw. It's a little bit bigger down here, but not much, so times might be just a little bit different, but hey, this is just for fun anyway. So anyway, I'll get the saw started and warmed up and be right back. Okay, we're ready. Well, there you have it. So we'll go back and check the times and be back and talk about the saws some more. Well, we get those cut pretty good and pretty quickly. But before I come back and talk about each saw individually and show the times, just briefly wanted to talk about a few other things. I was watching a video, and there's this guy that has a YouTube channel was talking about, he owns a huge firewood lot. He's talking about the saws that they used in the lot and whatnot. And anyway, he went to a great big logging expo, and he was wandering around talking to different people and said, well, if you had to have only one saw for the rest of your life, what would it be? And so it was kind of interesting because most of the people there are professional loggers or professional firewood people, and then some people like us, home and farm owners. But anyway, the choice by far were Husqvarna 72 series, 372 or 572 or the latest version of it. But wasn't very many people that said anything about Stihl, so it's kind of interesting. But one guy come up, and the guy was doing the interviews, that said, well, if you had just one saw, even when you're old and stuff, what would you get? The guy said, oh, I'd have a McCulloch SP 125. He said, well, that's the biggest, most powerful saw ever made, big and heavy, hard to start. And he said, yeah, but at least I'd have one. I'm with him. Anyway, there was one guy who said a ProMax 700 McCulloch, which is a saw that I use a lot, and that would be one of my choices. But the thing with me, not a pro, never been a pro, always just in for firewood and property management. But I started out in 1980 with a ProMax 610, just like this one. Still have it today. Still in great operating shape. I'm changing the oil tank on it because the screws in it pulled out and a piece of the metal broke off. When I got it, was 2 years old, and it had already been Mickeyed, but it lasted me all these years before it failed. So anyway, the reason that I still use these more than any other saw, the reliability. They require almost no repairs, just good maintenance. And so anyway, super long lasting, easy to work on. Even though they haven't made them since 1999, parts availability is still quite good on them. And the nice thing is they don't hardly ever need them. And so the only drawback, a lot of people say, oh, that's an old heavy saw and blah, 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 blah. And then you ask them, well, how many times have you used one? And, well, never. My buddy told me they're no good because they're too heavy and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, that's why you shouldn't listen to your buddies. So anyway, they are heavy. This one with a 24-inch bar on it. And this is a Windsor bar, a steel bar, and it's heavy for its era. And this power head and stuff, it weighs almost 20 pounds. But the guy that was doing an interview at the show there, he said, got to think about the saw you have when you're old and weak. And so if he had asked me if I'd been there, it still would have been one of these, because I would tell him my motto, if you have to complain about these, the weight of these, this means you're a weenie and you have to toughen up. So the thing is that exercise is what keeps you going when you're old, like me. And so having a nice heavy saw to move around and stuff gives you good exercise. And the other thing people don't talk about much is when you're cutting, if you have a lightweight saw, you got to push into it to get it to cut good and stuff. These, you just let the weight go on it. And I demonstrated that a while back in one of my old videos when I was running a big old Homelight C7. But go back and watch some of our older videos. So anyway, what we're going to do is be back. We'll set each saw out. We'll show you the times on each one and draw our conclusions. Okay, well, another thing I wanted to talk about is the chain that I use and whatnot. And I inherited a roll of 3/8 skip tooth, what they used to call chisel bit, but it's actually a round tooth, and today they don't call it that. But in my old antique manual, showed that Oregon had about 5 different variations on what they called chisel chain, and most of them are round tooth. Today that's not the case. They say it's either round tooth or square tooth or full chisel or semi-chisel for the round tooth. But I'm going to come over and look at these chips here. You can see what nice chips these all take. They're different sizes, like some of the smaller stuff here. That was off Mr. Cheesy here because the chain is quite worn on it. It's got probably about 50% of the left, and then the other two have almost new chains, and still has a brand new chain on it. But you know, this is really nice. Nice big chips. And there's all kinds of talk about sharpening, guys. Oh, I'm going to sharpen it this way, and I'm going to do that, and you know, there's a million different ways, and yeah, a lot of them are good. But here's what I do, and it works for me. I've talked about this in other videos too. This says Stihl on it, but it's actually a German-made file set, and what it does, it's a 2-in-1, so it files the tooth and it also files the raker here, the gauge, at the same time. And the company is called Pherd, P-H-E-R-D, and their files are the best quality files I've ever used. I've tried lots of different ones, but you know, if I want to sharpen this thing here, it only takes about 3 minutes. So you can see it's got a little arrow on it and tells you which way, and it's got these little marks here to line up. And so, you know, you put it on, and the little round file drops right in the tooth just like this, and the flat one right here touches up the raker, and you make sure it's aligned properly, and usually 3 strokes, and the thing is just as razor sharp. These are about 50 bucks, and they're worth it. I tried a lot of other stuff in the past, and I've done videos on it, but inconsistent results compared to this. So anyway, there you have it. What works for Mr. Obsolete. Okay, well, I wanted to talk briefly about the chips from the different saws here. And so we'll start over here. This is from the Mac 610, Montgomery Ward's version. Now, I put a chain on it quite some time ago, and it's got about probably 50-60% of the tooth left. And so the chips are a little smaller, but still decent. And then come over here to the Mac 650. Now, I had a new chain on it, and I was out on a job there and hit some rocks and kind of messed the chain up, so I used my bell saw sharpener on it. And then before we went out and cut on the stump there, I just took the 2-in-1 Pherd sharpener and went and touched it up just briefly. And you can see the chips are a lot bigger, and there's a lot of big pieces in here, and we'll come over and do a little close-up and show you better. Then on the Stihl 034 here, chips and stuff are just average, but that's a brand new old stock chain. I've never touched it up, but so it's interesting that the one that I sharpened with the 2-in-1 actually cuts better than the brand new chain that's not been touched. And then the one that had both types of sharpening is by far the best. So the interesting thing here is that with these big long chips and stuff, the 650 is actually doing the hardest cutting by far, but is also the fastest cutter by far too. So anyway, we'll come over and do a real close-up here. Okay, you can see that the chips are fairly small. There's some bigger ones in there. And then here, you can see those great big pieces there, and the other chips. The small chips here are actually mostly bark. And then we come over here, and you know, the chips are pretty much average. The small stuff there again is bark. So anyway, just kind of interesting stuff. Well, anyway, you can see that the McCulloch's actually outperformed the Stihl. I was kind of surprised by how much, but anyway, that's why I prefer these older saws for me. They got a really good balance of horsepower and torque, and in a hard cut like in that wood, torque is what gets the job done. And you can see the Mr. Cheesy there would try to stall out every so often. Has high RPM and horsepower, but no torque. So I'm going to do a muffler mod on it and a few other little minor things to see if I can improve the torque on it, because I did a carburetor swap and a muffler mod on my 025, and it was like night and day. The stock form, the 025, was semi-useless basically. But, well, the 650 here is one of my favorite saws because it has the extra horsepower over the stock 610 if I need to cut in some bigger wood or really hard cuts. And it weighs about 2 pounds less, more magnesium in it. And it's louder though. It has a strange pitch in the exhaust compared to the other one. You can hear it in the video. Well, our 034 here, Mr. Cheesy, kind of struggled a bit in that cut, and it did so the first time I did a stump, but that stump in the original video was frozen solid. This one was thawed out mostly. And the way it's set up right now, this 24-inch bar works it a bit hard, so when I originally did a video on it, I had an 18 on it, which worked really slick. But this saw, I would recommend it if you're doing, a fair amount of log work. Use it as a cleanup saw and for branching because of the high RPM. It cuts really quick and stuff. But the tough stuff, it's a little bit hard for it. So you know what that means. Well, here's a prime example of why vintage is best. And so anyway, if all goes well, we'll be on track and have another video out next week. And for our Christmas video, it'll be the day after Christmas, because Christmas is on a Monday. So anyway, we've got lots of neat stuff in there to show you. So vintage is best, and we'll see you on the next exciting video.